First of all, the honest and broad and ecumenical Jesus scholarship. We find that even though we have Anglican seminaries and Methodist seminaries and Catholic seminaries, up to now, they largely haven't talked to one another. When we were ordained in our denomination, really all we'd been exposed to, and I'm going to use an unkind word to make the point, but it's somewhat fair, is the propaganda of our own denomination, right? Not necessarily the broad consensus. I was trained, to be honest, to be a Catholic priest, right? Not necessarily a minister of the gospel. And that's a bias that now we're willing to see and recognize. Well, it's okay to be a Catholic priest, but as my Father Francis taught us, he said our vocation was to live and to preach the life of the gospel, not primarily the life of the church. What we realized when we put church theology first, we ended up with what we have today, which is churchianity. And I don't mean that cynically, well, maybe a little bit. I don't mean that too unkindly, but we have much more churchianity than we do Christianity. And suddenly we have eyes to see that. When I came out of my Catholic education, trained in this wonderful little book, and I still have a copy of it, called the Baltimore Catechism. I looked through it again this morning to make sure I wasn't making this up. This is what American Catholics were trained with in the 1950s. I was given the 6 commandments of the church. I was not taught the Sermon on the Mount. I was not taught the 8 Beatitudes. I was not taught the healing stories of Jesus, where clearly he was concerned about healing people now. Here, I was primarily taught about saving people for later. Right? That's a significant change. Significant redirection of the energy. And the vehicle for saving people for later was the church. And so, in short, what we did, in great part, we became preoccupied with the container instead of the contents, and tried to prove that we, whatever group we were a part of, was the best container. Right? I have the one holy, Catholic, and apostolic container, and much of the teaching in this book was to prove to little Catholics that very point. It's a piece of the truth, but it's not the whole truth. And when you make the piece of the truth the whole truth, you end up with untruth, I'm afraid, because the perspective is entirely wrong. So when I was even invited in the late 1960s to go away and get a degree in Scripture, a major degree, they said, now, Richard, you know, you're going to have to get very good in Greek and very good in Latin and very good in Hebrew. And I said, well, I'm not very good in any of those already. So maybe I shouldn't go away and get a degree in Scripture. But that was the idea at that time. If you were good in languages, you would be good in Scripture. Then somewhere along the line, in fact, I'll be honest, this only hit me about 10 years ago. Jesus didn't even speak Greek. So why would knowing the exact Greek verb help you to understand Jesus? Do you understand? But that wasn't our concern, you know. In fact, he didn't even speak classic Hebrew. It was a minor dialect called Aramaic that he spoke. So none of us really had the exact words of Jesus. And all this fighting over what Jesus exactly said apparently was not even Jesus' concern. Isn't that shocking? Isn't that a little scary? If that was his concern, he would have come and did what I'm doing right now. He would have talked so it could have been recorded and no one would miss the exact word. Apparently that's not the point. It's at the energetic level, the life level, the love level that the mystery of Jesus is passed on. Not just getting the right words. The third big insight that opened up so many of us already in the 1980s was the recognition that up to that point, and this is not an exaggeration, almost all scriptural interpretation, scholarship, preaching, and teaching had been done by a very small group of people. White, overeducated, European or North American males, right? And many of them, in the Catholic tradition, celibate besides. Now that's a lovely group of people. I happen to be one of them myself. But the trouble is, what would make you think that that little group would have the perfect eyes to recognize the other perspectives? And I want to just list a few of them. The feminist, womanist lens just opened up and allowed us to see things women saw that we men just never noticed. Just didn't jump out at us because we were men. We don't read the scriptures from the eyes of the lower person. We always read it from the position of power because white, educated, European and North American males, that's what we were. The lens of the poor. Translations came out in the Philippines and Latin America just so that poor, uneducated people, which something like, the fishermen, could understand it and could read it and could interpret it through their set of eyes. The lens of black people, African theology. The lens of gay people. The Jewish lens, which was one of the most significant of all. I mean, I don't think we Christians realize that for some reason we assumed, stupidly, that Jesus was a Christian. How could we miss such a basic point, that he wasn't a Christian, he never heard of Christianity, I'm sorry. In fact, I'd even question whether he intended it. I think he was trying to reform his Jewish religion, and in that was trying to reform all religion. So now, one of the most significant educations you can get to interpret Scripture is not to be good in Greek and Hebrew, although that helps, but in fact, cultural anthropology, which a lot of us don't even know what it means. But to understand how culture works and how you think inside of a culture and how the Jewish people were thinking and how Jesus was thinking when he said the things he said. And if you don't appreciate that Jewish culture and that first century Palestinian worldview, you miss the impact of most of the healing stories of Jesus.